I'd like to welcome, this is the public session of the meeting that we're having today following the private LSP meeting. Discussion on the meeting. We have, I want to welcome our guests tonight, outside of the LSP. You know who you are, and all I ask from you tonight is that when people are speaking, that you give them some, give them the time of day, be nice to them. We're all here for the same purpose. Sorry, John, I just got to reiterate for the people who aren't here. We're all here for the same purpose. We're here because we love WBAI. We might differ in our opinions, we might differ in who we like and who we don't like, we might differ in whatever. The bottom line is we love WBAI. And we, in attendance tonight, we have Executive Director Summer Reese, as well as Berthold, who's our station manager. And we have a quorum from the LSB. So, there are, there are agendas out there. Is anybody wishing an agenda that does not have one? Are there any extra agendas floating around? Can we get one down here? Thanks. I'm going to be sitting down, just want to make sure. So, we just ask one thing, and that's when people are speaking, don't yell out at them, let them finish what they have to say. We're all here for the right thing. Okay, so, report out from executive session. Now we have executive session prior, and the first agenda item here is the report out, and who's going to be giving that?
Let Cohen, he has it.
All right, Mr. Cohen, Mr. Secretary, would you please deliver
the report out from executive session is that the WBAI LSP met in executive session to discuss contractual, legal, and personnel issues of a confidential nature. The Executive Director reported to the LSP that Pacifica has received 10 responses to the request for proposals for the Public Service Operating Agreement, LMA. She will provide the LSP with a written summary of the key elements of such proposals confidentially without specifying the applicants' names. The Executive Director also discussed personnel matters concerning the General Manager and recommended that the local station board perform an evaluation of the GM as soon as possible. That's it.
The selection of a timekeeper and
Sean,
where's the bell?
He's sitting right there with her.
If we need to, is that I nominate Sean be the time second.
Anybody opposed? All in favor?
And the wash?
All opposed? Motion carries. Okay. So, the first item, folks, okay, because we're all here for the same thing, please. And again, I ask people on the LSP that have heard the stuff before that we have to show respect to the people from the audience that have come here for the open session to please maintain some kind of, keep it low, get a talk, so that the people in the audience can hear what we have to say. Consideration of a proposal to enter into a public service operating agreement, LMA, 30 minutes. Okay, so I'd like to turn over the consideration for a proposal to enter into public service operating agreement to the Pacifica, and let's give a warm welcome to Summer Reese, Pacifica Director, on this issue. Thank you.
I'm relatively limited in what I can say about this in open session. We just spent some time in closed session discussing it, and I've touched on some of the elements when I was on the air, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks ago. A public service operating agreement, or an LMA, is highly regulated by the FCC in terms of the elements of control that are required to be maintained by the license holder, in this case Pacifica or WBAI. It is an agreement by which you lease out your airtime essentially to a third-party entity, but you're still required to maintain a main studio to employees, control over finances, in theory over programming, and some other key elements. The FCC requires that the license holder be able to take over its airwaves on a moment's notice. That's why you are required to maintain a main studio and 2 employees. So that if something happens and your third party is not able to continue broadcasting, that you can step in immediately and continue broadcasting. The license holder has the ability to reject or preempt programming. So practically speaking, if you find something offensive and not to be tolerated on your airwaves, you can reject it. Conversely, if there was some sort of national emergency or other thing that the license holder felt warranted preemption, one can do that. Practically speaking, these type of agreements do in fact hand over your broadcast day to a third party. And you negotiate for what that looks like and whether you maintain blocks of programming that are still, in this case, Pacifica originated or WBAI. We have received 10 offers, a range of different types of offers, and the National Board has not yet considered any of these offers. At our 4-day in-person meeting in Houston, Texas, we unfortunately did not spend even 10 minutes discussing the massive problems that we have in New York, and I think that's extremely unfortunate. But it also means things are not necessarily moving as quickly as people here might fear, because in fact, although all of those offers were presented to the board has not yet discussed or considered any of them. And that is probably the limitation on what I can say publicly about any of that. I believe the board members may have various motions that they want to bring in response to consideration of these offers. I think it needs to be clear to the public, the reason we entered into a request for proposal was to normalize a process in which I was already receiving offers from various entities because we have been in the press so continuously during this year for our extreme financial difficulties at this station. To put that in perspective, WBAI has been losing 6 figures a year for 10 straight years, draining all resources of the entire Pacifica Foundation and stripping out the last reserves that the national office had this year to meet the payroll obligations prior to my laying off 2/3 of the staff. So this is something that was occurring whether or not we normalized the process, and I felt it was important to make it a transparent and straightforward process with certain parameters, which is why I recommended to the board that we in fact have an RFP. The underlying issue is, in fact, that the station has not been able to produce sufficient income to pay its bills for a decade. And although I've brought down operating costs $1.2 million in one fiscal year, which is profound for an organization that is in this much distress, we still do not have the severance to meet our obligations to our employees who were laid off. And we are still struggling on a month-to-month basis to pay transmitter rent. So it would be organizationally irresponsible not to look at every possibility to save the license and not go off the air and simply lose an extremely valuable asset, which is a 50,000 watt license in the #1 market in America. So the fact that the board is considering these things should not be construed as an indication that any of these agreements are desired by members of the national board, including in other signal areas, but merely the fact that we do need to consider all available options in a situation so dire that every month we do not know if the transmitter rent will be made. And that is the situation. Obviously, these financial issues should have probably been dealt with several years ago, before it was quite as dire as it was by the time I became the interim executive director last year. Moving out of Wall Street has obviously significantly reduced those costs, but we are still spread over 2 locations right now, and that is also difficult for producers and staff. Laying off such a significant portion of staff has made it difficult for the remaining staff to keep the station operational. So we're struggling under many concrete and tangible realities, financial and otherwise. So all that being said, I think that at least hopefully we'll put it into some context as to how we arrived at this place, and how fast the board will consider anything is unknown to me as well at this point. But they do have all offers in hand, and I anticipate that at some upcoming meeting we will discuss some of the features of each of those offers. And I continue to seek feedback from my colleagues in terms of which things they find appropriate or which things they do not wish to pursue, so that they will give me something to work with our FCC council and how we proceed from here. At the same time, I'm working on a parallel track to save the station because I think the process is going to move so slowly that if we don't make decisive steps to continue to address our financial situation and pay our tower rent, we'll be off the air before the board makes a decision. So clearly, those issues continue to need to be addressed. And if we're successful in addressing some of these issues, we may find ourselves in a different position financially to where one of these agreements is not so attractive and does not need to be entered into. And some of that will depend on community response, how effective we are at raising money in various other ways, and whether we can do it quickly enough to turn the situation around so that there are other options that are viable for the organization. And I sincerely hope that that's the case and that we find that we are able to save the station without having to enter into such an agreement. But we have to continue to pursue all things in order to save this station one way or the other, because that's how critical it is right now. And that's probably all I have to say, and I'm sure during public comment, I'm happy to hear all the feedback from the public, including even if it is all, don't enter into one of these agreements, because I understand that is the sentiment. And the flip side of that is we still have to come up with $50,000 a month just for the tower rent, never mind the other expenses or the fact that we have not met our obligations to our union members. So, and I'll hand it back to the chair in case board members, whatever they wish to input on this issue in open session.
If the board doesn't want it to continue to go in the way that we did before. Well, it's all right. It's all right. People spoke.
I'd recommend, being a member of the Finance Committee, I think I know what the motion is that the treasurer is going to read in the next section. I think it's relevant to this issue. So I was wondering if we get agree that the treasurer read that motion now.
It's right here in the handout.
If people want me to, I can.
Yeah.
Can people identify themselves before they speak? Because
I'm Robert Young, I'm the LSP chair. You call me Bob.
I'm William Hairwagon, listener, LSP member.
It's in the packet that you have.
Yeah, but I had it written down myself.
On the back page of the treasurer's
And I
report.
have it up here. There's too much paper in my way. All right. Damn it. All right.
There it is. That's it.
Pardon me, I have more paper than I should have.
So the short answer is he's not able.
Where the hell is my paper? All right, I'll read it out of the one that's been handed out then.
With all my changes, no doubt.
I have, yes, well, I copied it from what was posted to the
Just
entire
kidding.
world. What page is that thing on?
Last page,
Last?
it's on the back of your treasurer's report.
In the back of my treasury report. All right. This motion will come up later. I'm reading it now just so everybody hears it. The WBAI Local Finance, I'm R. Paul Martin, I'm the treasurer of the LSP. The WBAI Local Finance Committee strongly urges the WBAI Local Station Board to urge the Pacifica National Board to postpone any decisions on the local management agreement option and any other changes in WBAI's operational status until all other fundraising options for WBAI have been exhausted. In particular, we urge the interim executive director to organize a network-wide emergency fund drive with the support of the PNB specifically aimed at paying off WBAI's immediate external debts, and to conduct an immediate fundraising mailing and emailing to the entire WBAI database. In addition, the Finance Committee recommends that the LSP demand that no decision on leasing WBAI or any other such status changes be made by the PNB before a public presentation and discussion by the WBAI LSP, on-air discussions in several time slots, and an LSP town hall meeting. That's the motion.
Got that?
Thank you.
Okay.
Robert, Bob, I'm sorry.
I'm Bob Lederer. I'm a staff representative on the LSP. I strongly support this motion. I think that if the decision, making a decision about leasing out the station signal for a period of years is an extremely serious decision, and it should not be taken until every reasonable fundraising option has been exhausted. I don't think that's the case. There have been several suggestions over the past few months made by listeners, staff, board members, and others for such things as an emailing and mailing to the entire database that WBAI holds, not just the current membership, but lapsed members as well. There are possibilities for exploring exchanges with other like-minded progressive organizations. There are possibilities for advertising in publications of diverse nature. There's many things we could talk about, but I don't believe that that has been exhausted. So that's point one. And point two is that I find the lack of transparency around this issue really disturbing, and both a violation of our bylaws, but also a violation of the spirit of what community radio is supposed to be all about. And certainly, if we're thinking of surrendering the control of programming to an outside entity, that decision, and not only whether to do it, but to whom, absolutely should be a public conversation. And so in that regard, I'm extremely disturbed and disagree with the executive director's refusal not only to share the names of the applicants with the LSB confidentially, and this is despite a motion clearly by the Pacifica National Board clearly directing her to do so. On October 3rd, the PNB instructs the interim ED to prepare a request for proposals for PSOAs for approval at the next meeting, et cetera, and instructs the IED to schedule a conference call with the WBAI LSB in the next 5 to 7 working days in executive session to discuss responses received to date. She has not done that, and even in tonight's meeting, all she promised was a summary without giving the names. I would actually go even further and say, not only does the LSB have a right to receive them confidentially, but the public has a right to the names. That's a different question than every single detail of each proposal, but certainly the names. We need to know which entity, and we need to have the public, our listeners and our staff, vet those names and say, well, I've actually dealt with the XYZ organization, and they're very problematic, or they're wonderful, or they have a tremendous track record, there's a lot of synergy, or not. So I would just urge that we not only adopt this motion from the Finance Committee, which, by the way, was agreed on unanimously, which is a rare thing in WBAI, but also that we add a provision to call upon the PNB to conduct its deliberations on everything that is in any way possible to do in public as well.
Okay. Yeah, I am opposed to a public service operating agreement. I'm opposed to a public service operating agreement, certainly at this time. WBAI, however, I've put out a treasurer's report. I think somebody copied it. It's around, and I'll do a fast report later. But Pacifica and BAI are both in bad financial shape, and I don't want to see us going into this multi-year thing, because you can't do one of these for like 6 months, recover and get it. This type of thing you do for years at a time. In some cases, they can do it for like 10 or 20 years. The proposals that I've seen posted online, the RFP for it, is for maybe up to 8 years, but even like 5 or 6 years would be a long time. And so I would not like to see us doing this. The only way I would say, geez, we'd have to do this, is if we really had to do this, and there was only a choice of either it goes away completely, or you do this and hope you can recover in 8 years. One of the things that has happened is BAI has adjusted a few things. One, we have tragically had to let go a lot of paid staff. The paid staff was, the payroll was over $100,000 a month. We couldn't do it. We, in fact, were missing payrolls, which you can't do. It's illegal. And we missed payrolls a couple of times earlier in the year. We couldn't afford to pay people, and the NLRB said, you cannot continue to employ people and not pay them. Either let them go or pay them now. So people got let go, unfortunately. And We have also moved out of 120 Wall Street, which was it had an outrageous ballooning rent to it. I mean, some people were suckered in because we got the first year free. Some of us said, don't do that. They did it. But we're now in much cheaper rental situation, and so that helps. And I think that with the way we've done in the last thon, although I don't necessarily agree with some of the stuff happening in the thon, coming through that, we need to see if BAI can survive. We need to give ourselves some time. And I am hoping that the PNB will hold off completely on a PSOA for some amount of time so that we can see if we can float BAI in its current configuration with our much lower expenses and see if that can fly. And again, if that couldn't, and we're going to lose everything, I guess we'd have to look at a PSOA, but I would hope that we are given a good chance to survive on our own. I think we need a program director. Today they announced an interim program director is there, and I think maybe that can help, and maybe the next thon will really be good, and maybe the winter thon, which I think will be about February or so, will be even better. And so I'm hoping we can get through this, and I'm hoping the PNB will at least put this off to see how BAI does. Give us a chance.
Seth? Yeah, my extremely limited...
Name, please.
Oh, yeah, my name is Seth Goldberg. I'm a listener representative on the LSP. My extremely limited understanding of the finances goes something like this. WBAI is not even living hand to mouth at this point. It's going under by... I don't know, $50K a month, and we're hoping that the mini-thon in the next month will pull us through. That might be a low estimate of how much we're going into. On the other hand, the lease rental agreement is not great shape. My limited understanding is that the foundation does not actually make money from it, except to cover its already existing expenses. But there's some finagle room in that. But basically, you can pay for the transmitter, you can pay for the operational staff, for the supervisory role, you can pay for certain other things, but it's not the case that you can do what a landlord does in New York, which is to charge a very high rent and then look for profit from that rent. So what you're looking for, it's like you're very sick, you're an extremist, and you're looking not to get completely wiped out by being forced into either voluntary or involuntarily bankruptcy to meet these problems. Now, that means that other unpalatable propositions would also have to be considered, and we're also asking for, and I promise to report on those, things like that kind of nonprofit advertising that you sometimes get on public stations and stuff like that. They're all being considered, and they will probably come to open discussion, since they're policy issues with the public here and an open session on the LSP. I thought that information should be out there. Thank you.
Carolyn, you next.
Thank you. Yes, Carolyn Burden, a listener representative on the board. I'm concerned that the motion as presented is much too open-ended. It assumes that we have an unlimited amount of time to get an unlimited amount of money. And I think, as the executive director has pointed out, the foundation was not even able to find somebody to run a special 2-day or 1-day fund drive for WBAI across the network, which would have been a lifesaver. There wasn't even a producer available throughout the network to do that for us. This is bad news. And my fear is that if we in fact work along with the plans that we have been. I mean, in 10 years, we haven't been able to raise enough money to make ourselves sustainable. The thought that we can do it now in the next 3 months is a lovely idea. I've got my fingers crossed. If we wait too long, these agreements, these proposals may go away. They may, at that point, we may be not a very interesting proposition for anyone wanting to invest in us. So we really have a dilemma here. These proposals are looking at us in our present situation, and our present situation deteriorates. Will they be there when we really need them after we have tried and perhaps not been successful at creating a sustainable station? Living month to month as we have been doing is not going to do it. So I'm in a dilemma. I don't know. I started out being against the LMAs. Now I'm thinking about a bird in the hand being worth two in the bush. I'm not sure how to really approach this, but that is my feeling, that we need much better financial data. A really good business plan worked up for the next 6 months based on our progress going forward. I haven't seen those figures yet.
We're gonna have to do stack here. Uno momento, por favor, is Manager. Steve was next, and then Frank, and then John, and then just Cerise, and then, okay? That's the order, all right? Let's get through this order first, okay? Go.
I'm Marisha Savo, I'm just
And then John.
a board member. But also I'm on PMB, so I have had the privilege of seeing, being into the discussion and looking at this for longer than you are and you have. This is very difficult situation that we are. It's very difficult for all of us to see the management of the station to be given to anybody else. But at the same time, I have to come to see that we also, whatever we do, we have to be realistic. I am not giving up on doing this ourselves by doing all sorts of fundraising, whatever we can do. But from what I heard, I think there's a lot of wishful thinking in that proposal that is here. For example, when we say that we are going to do it, and if this is the way we want to do it, we would end up to be wherever we were before. The past 10 years that we have, we do the same thing. Because we haven't come up and we haven't been able, even during all of this crisis in this year, we were not able to raise money the way we want WBAI to raise money. All of us don't want, for example, all of these CAN programs, getting all 24 hours a day, all of that. That I could not even think, once in a while I wanted to see what it is, I would turn the radio on and I would turn it off immediately. So if this is what we want to go, this is not the BAI that was envisioned or the mission that is this station is based on. We haven't come up, we don't have it. If we had it, we have not been able to have proper management of BAI. Proper management meaning being able to maintain ourselves in a way that we need to maintain ourselves and raise funds that we need. So we have to become realistic about this and come with proposals for sustainability that are realistic. And we need to have a sustainability plan for BAI no matter what we decide. As Summer Reese was saying, that because the requirements that we should have at least two people, two staff, and we have to have a station that we can come back and do the work itself if, for varieties of reasons, decide to do it. But none of this proposal has, to me, when I'm hearing it, is all about wishful thinking and ideological. We have been ideological for all of these years and we haven't got any place. We need to live in real world to see how we can do this, how we are able to do that. And unless we come with a very serious plan, not what we want to see, what we wish to be, unless we come with a serious plan, there is no other option is left to us in a very short time to accept one of these. We have asked, actually, at PMB about a month ago, it was told, Summer told people who are objecting this, come with a plan. Come with a solid plan that we can look at it, and we are going to look at all of the plans that is coming. Nobody has come up with a plan. And this is a wishful list that 20 people have got together and put all of their ideological and whatever mind they had to come. This is a plan? This is not a plan. So we need a plan. And it was, PNB had requested that everybody who has a plan to come a plan for sustainability. We haven't seen anyone unless you have produced it. We had one that originally was made, but other people have problem with it, they can come with their own. But we said we are entertaining all of the proposal that comes. Thanks.
Yeah. The problem is that the two plans, number one, lease WBAI, number two, keep going on the way they are and see if we can survive. Both stink. The lease agreement does not operating costs. That keeps it exactly where it is forever. It will never be able to, in effect, buy that lease back. It has to be for permanent separation of the station Pacifica. Anyone who hides that fact is just irresponsible. So that's no good. Any money that is raised by the lease manager, the other plan to let WBAI pull itself out by its bootstraps, WBAI doesn't even have boots. The plans that I've seen for making a go of it are terrible. They are wishful thinking. They are opening a lemonade stand to rescue a 50-story building. Doesn't work. There are plans that WBAI needs big infusions of cash relatively quickly. There are ways to do that. Several people on this board have suggested those plans for years to management, both at the local level and national level. And the management has always said it's a great idea. But have any of them been adopted? No, they haven't even been tested. So I personally do not see, since I see that WBAI, all these plans that were submitted by management of how they're going to struggle forward, they're lousy. And I do not myself see how WBAI, given those plans, can ever possibly struggle along and make it. The third way, adopt some of the different plans for making large amounts of money, some of which have been tested and worked, seem not to be on the table and never were, in which case there is no hope. Both plans are lousy. That's my evaluation.
Frank?
I can summarize, I hope, if my voice holds out. My feeling about the so-called LMA is this. If the PNB puts off studying these proposals until they've got like 1 week to act or else, they may rush into an agreement which would be much, much worse than the agreement that they could have achieved if they spent some time studying it. That's why I think it's irresponsible to say that the PNB should not begin studying the proposals. God forbid they would ever have to accept one, but they have to study them in order to be in a position to make the best bargain they can make to preserve as much of our function as possible at the time. Now,
9:20.
John, okay, so we have five more speakers on stack, which is...
am I finished talking?
I said we have 5 more speakers on tack. We'll go through them when we're done. Talk ahead, finish.
Go, Frank.
No, you
How many
continue.
minutes finish, Frank?
That was not your bell, that was just for the news.
We've hit time beside it.
Go.
Continue talk.
John Tarleton is here from the Independent, and I don't know if he brought samples or not, but I have put full-page ads in 2 issues, last month and this month. I have asked people to help me in less costly. There are fundraisers, small fundraisers that Mitch Cohen and others have organized, which have not in themselves raised an awful lot of money, but serve to publicize the station. Nobody in the past 10 years, and I pointed this out 10 years ago at the first LSP, has ever had the job duty, the responsibility of advertising the station. If the PNB were to invest in advertising via BAI, we might grow an audience if we to sustain ourselves. Now, in favor of the possibility that we can do this are these small initiatives that I have suggested. Arguing against this, however, is the response that I've gotten when I've posted requests on the LSB public board and so on and forth and at CAD meetings, asking if people would get in touch with me so I can suggest ways that they can publicize the station in some low-cost, low-effort kinds of ways. And the response has been zilch. So in contrast to the thousands of people in the streets 10 years ago trying to say, we don't even have a handful doing that now. So I have one suggestion for the fundraising for the immediate need, and that is targeted donations. Last spring, we did pretty well asking people, save our antenna. No premiums, no prizes, no gimmicks, just spend money to save our antenna. We got a big response. I'm suggesting that early in December, or if not sooner, we have 2 weeks of targeted requests. One, save our employees from the poorhouse, namely raise up enough money to pay their severance pay. And 2, save our antenna, of course.
Okay. Thank you, Frank. So we're not taking any more people on stack. We have John Brinkley next, Serene, Bob, Janet, and then John lastly.
I did want to just mention, I went to the WFMU local board meeting, and they didn't know, at least some of the board members did not know about this proposal that had already been submitted at that point. And they, some of their reaction was, it looks like kind of a mess, and what's in it for us? And I felt that, they've certainly got some strengths, but they financially, their balance sheets don't look strong. They don't look strong at all. They don't look like they could last a month with our expenses. And one of the things that I did talk to the GM about was the question of some of the moves in programming that have happened here at the station, and which included the cancellation of the 9 to 11 o'clock slot, which was later rescinded. But his reaction to that was, well, putting in Tom Hartman is a good idea. And those programs that were canceled are islands, and they'll never build a mass audience. So, when I look at the PSOA, I guess I feel very concerned. Is it going to be a community radio station anymore? Or is it, what's it going to look like? Because also they were talking about 20 hours a week for Pacifica programming. And this was all at an open public meeting that they were talking about. So the other thing is that, I felt a little concerned. I mean, they're going to set up another non-for-profit corporation in order to do this. And if they were to get the PSOA, and so it wouldn't even be Oracle Communications per se. And they seem to do this, set up different kinds of corporations for a number of their projects, including they got a grant from the Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation for something called the Audience Building Project, which is a very worthy project of developing software for monetizing community and public radio stations and investigative reporting. And, it's quite a large grant, $400,000. So it's, and it's to build the kind of software that they already have, but have to lease from somebody else for a lot of money every year. But it does allow each individual show, you can, pledge to your show, and they are maintaining. They have like a sustainable project, but it's very grassroots. But I had questions about them too, because they want to set up a for-profit in order to manage this. And the general manager and the assistant general manager would also be minor partners in this, or shareholders within this for-profit owned by a non-for-profit. Very complicated kind of corporate structure that I haven't heard of before, but you know, that's something to consider. And I took extensive notes at that meeting. So, and I guess finally, you know, I think to me, going with the PSOA is not very desirable, but in order to do it, we really do have to do those mailings. Those mailings are absolutely essential, and we really need those lists, Bertold. The really, you know, the good lists that we can call from, and we really need the phone lines installed upstairs so that we can do that, and it has to be multi-lines. And, you know, I think we need to also be thinking about, can we make a studio arrangement where David Rothenberg could be maybe coaxed back, because we're talking about, he used to contribute $200,000 a year to our budget, and that would be one way to kind of dig out from under this mess. And I mean, we're going to need that, you know, and I hope we don't have to wait until a studio is constructed upstairs, because I think it's going to be a while before that can happen. So.
Thank you, John.
Okay, so a few different things. Summer, I think the last, well, it may not have been the last time, but it might have been the last time you were here in New York in February and met with this board.
I was here in August.
You met with the board in August? Anyway, we talked about the structural engineering reports, and you promised to get those to the LSB. We still don't have them. John's statement about a studio just reminded me about that, so it'd be really good if you could send that on to us so we can see what really is feasible, because there have been different reports about what we can and cannot reasonably do by way of broadcasting here, which is the whole push to have everything together, but we need to know what's happening. I want to broach a possibility that I think I've mentioned to a few people over the years, but I think certainly before we consider leasing out our signal, we need to explore the possibility, not of leasing our signal to someone else and hoping that we get some time reserved in the contract, but in fact exploring leasing some of our time out and keeping control of our station. And I'm not talking about the people who are hawking mortgage cures on certain stations we shall not mention, you know, to certain communities. But I'm talking about finding people who actually do the kind of thing that we do. You know, I don't want to mention specifics, but I guess I can. I mean, UN Radio, they do a lot of really interesting stuff that our listeners don't get to hear anymore. They used to be tie lines back in the day, but, you know, they don't get to hear that anymore. And there are other possibilities, not all of which I'll delve into now. But we really need to consider that as a way of getting income in. And I know everybody wants it to happen at a time that doesn't affect their show, but you know, hey, something's got to go. And it shouldn't be the entire station. So I'd like us to, I'd like that to be considered long before we get to the point of talking about giving away our station, because we're not going to get it back. And this is a crucial period in terms of what's happening in this country and what's happening in New York. We were in drive time for much of the pre-election period, right? We got some election coverage, I think, just before the election is when our drive ended. You know, and it's unfortunate that our drives line up to strictly to financial need and not to what's happening in the world, but we need BAI. So for me, not having a functional BAI, and there are many of us who, you know, get grief from our families because of the amount of time and effort we devote to BAI. In fact, we know that everyone at BAI is crazy. The people who work there are crazy, the people who listen are crazy, you know, but we're the right kind of crazy much of the time, right? So we just have to get rid of the kind of crazy that prevents us from getting stuff done. And I don't mean the crazy people, I mean the crazy with all due respect to people who are legitimately mentally ill, the crazy behavior, you know, that really prevents us from getting what we have to do done. Because a New York without BAI, and they aren't, not enough people know we exist, it is true. But for those people who do know that we exist, even now, with all the instability that has been introduced on so many levels, there's still some value here. And we need to, if I dare use the word, capitalize on that and start to build back up, which means rebuilding alliances, rebuilding our staff and our staff unions, rebuilding a process where people feel that they're getting fair treatment. You may not always like the result, but you want to know that there's a process to what happens, right? Not that we were ever perfect. Everyone has their story, but we can do better than we're doing now. And in that vein, I hope that we will also discuss, although we can't perhaps discuss salaries and so forth, we will discuss how it came to be that we have an IPD when we had engaged in an IPD process earlier in the year. That, we understand, you asked be put on hold until things were more stable. Since then, we've had 2 IPDs, each of them a surprise to us. We hear about them on the radio. The bylaws are pretty clear that the intention is for the local board to have a strong role in the pool of persons being considered for program director. We're radio. Programming is what we do. And the fact that every time, I don't know if it's fair to say every time, every 3 months, right? Because we got Andrew Phillips. He was announced on October 9th, the same day that the staff was laid off. And knowing that we were having a meeting this evening, I just happened to be listening to the radio this morning, and I hear that we now have an IPD in the form of Bob Henley. And I'd like to know how that happens. You know, there needs to be some mutual respect and some compliance with our bylaws. I think that's a problem. I think our listeners look in at what we're doing in terms of management and governance, and they say there's too much instability here. If I have a choice of spending my $100 with BAI, and I don't know who's going to be there tomorrow, or if they'll be there next week, and I have a choice of doing something else with that $100, I think that as tight as things are, people are not, as much as they love the station, they don't know what it is anymore. They feel there's very little connection. There may be one program left that someone can tune to. Some of my favorite programs are no longer on the air, or my single favorite program is no longer on the air. I understand it's not about individual radio, but the sense that things are just out of control is overwhelming, and it affects, you know, it affects everything we do. I'll stop.
Thank you. Okay, well, I'll happily talk to our FCC council regarding leasing out time, as you've asked, and I don't know what you're talking about me stopping anything to do with an IPD process here, because I've never been consulted on that. I certainly haven't stopped anything, and I'm not aware that your LSB has presented any sort of a pool for a PD anytime this year to the general manager. So, but I think we all agree that you do need some assistance in addressing your on-air content.
Mr. Letterman? You know, are you, okay, John, you're next. So John, so the last 3 people on stack is John, Bob, and Janet. That's it. Okay?
Okay. I think that people can live with 6 months, Manager, of going through the kind of programming and fundraising that we've been going through if they know at the end, if it's 6 months of doing that versus 6 or 8 years of giving up the station. I think the choice is simple. We can go through 6 months of not having exactly the kind of fundraising that we would like to have, as long as it's paying the bills. But I do think that on a more stable solution would be to use some money to hire a professional. There were a lot of ideas that were thrown out including underwriting. Steve had some ideas he said were so great, but there's no one to really do them. Bob put out a bunch of ideas that are laying on the table. You get take some money to hire a professional fundraiser, do some crowdsourcing, because we have a lot of talented people in our audience to serve kind of as a team, maybe a volunteer team to be directed by that professional to do some of the things that are laying on the table that are good ideas that just need a person with the skills and the knowledge and then the manpower in order to implement it. So I think that we can deal with 6 months of going through the same kind of paying bill kind of fundraising, put a team in place that can go after some off-air money, and then at the end of that 6 months be able to get back to the kind of programming that people expect.
Thank you, John. Bob?
Okay, well, first, just a little correction to what John just said. Actually, the ideas that I have put on the table are not my ideas. They're actually from.
Well, I meant the ones that you articulate.
Thank you. But there's been a lot of creative and collective brainstorming about how to save the station. I had a question for Summer and then a comment. The question is, Summer, tonight you talked about wanting to see viable fundraising for the station to stave off an LMA, but that it may come to the point where there's no alternative. Have you quantified and written criteria to present to the PNB as to what will be the trigger point that will lead you to recommend an LMA financially?
I've made it perfectly clear to the PNB that the Pacifica National Office has stripped all of its reserves to make the payroll obligations in New York, and that on a monthly basis, whether or not you pay your transmitter rent is in question. Right now, as of today, Bertolt has paid half of this month's transmitter rent, because that's all you can pay, because you don't have a full month's worth of transmitter rent, and it's the 22nd of November, and it was due on the 1st. So that's your reality. Your reality is you're broke and you don't have your payroll and you don't have your transmitter rent, and that's every month. So in terms of trigger point, at the point that we are unable to take any money from anywhere else, whoever made the point that indeed, even if the PNB were to vote tomorrow to take an LMA, virtually no one has the money to simply lay on you the next day and say, here's your transmitter rent. You're in danger of losing your signal every month. So the trigger point will be the point at which we can't find any money anywhere to keep you on the air anymore. That's why we, in good conscience, need to consider things now, because you're always at the point of about to go off the air. And that's how you've been the whole time I've been here, and certainly it seems that's how you, when I went to court months ago, when the transmitter rent was $250,000 past due, I had trouble finding the courtroom because you guys have been in eviction court so many times in the last 10 years, okay? That's how many times you've not paid your transmitter rent on time. There were so many cases filed, I had trouble sorting through them to find the one that was the current eviction case, okay? I've never seen anything like that in my life. So I don't know what to say, Bob. It's critical, and it's been critical for a decade.
Okay, thanks. So my comment is to add some dimensions to what John Riley talked about concerning WFMU, which is owned by Aura Communications. It's based in Jersey City, and it's a primarily music station. And their general manager, who's also kind of like the CEO of the foundation, traveled to Houston for the Pacifica National Board meeting 2 weeks ago, which I also did just on my own because of my concern. And while we were all locked out because of the secret sessions going on, we chatted. And he told me that he was there to try to, get some support for his application for an LMA. And he told me that they were proposing that about a third of the program schedule would be public affairs and news, leaving 2/3 as music, arts, drama, and so forth. That would be a considerable, a major reduction from the current balance of WBAI, and that in and of itself was very troubling to me. And also, of course, when I said who would make the decisions, he said, well, basically be me, but I'll have a committee that I'll appoint, and people can apply for shows. But I mean, this is exactly the nub of the problem with an LMA, and certainly even if you have to have one, what's absolutely crucial is the politics and the judgment of the people running that organization. And we can look at one decision that he and his colleagues made years ago and draw your own conclusion. And that is, they decided to devote 15 hours a week in prime time, 3 hours in the morning, to a program called JM and the AM, which is hosted by a person who sits on their board and, according to their IRS 990, draws a salary, Nachum Siegel. And the program is about Jewish culture and public affairs issues, which is fine, speaking myself as someone raised Jewish. But my problem with it is that there's frequent coverage of the Israeli government in totally 100% supportive ways for all of the repression, all of the occupation, the violation of human rights, the war making, all of the things Israel does get cheerleaded in prime time on this program by a board member who's paid. And that, to me, speaks volumes to the judgment of the person who would be running WBAI. Whether or not he would put that same show on our air is not my point. My point is that what other kinds of decisions is he likely to make if that's the decision he's made for 15 hours of prime time? So I think that in itself, combined with, their downplaying, by his own account, his intention to greatly cut public affairs, which is the opposite of what we need at this time of crisis, domestically, locally, nationally, and internationally. I think we have to really be seriously troubled by that as a viable, to be considered a viable option.
This information for Bob, a letter. Bob, given what you just said, why would you continue to favor that resolution that was just read from the Finance Committee, rather than allow the PMB enough time to rationally consider the other 9 offers that are on the table? In other words, do you interpret that resolution that R. Paul just read from the Finance Committee as halting consideration of the 10 different LMA offers, or allowing them to continue to consider and evaluate those offers, get further details on them and negotiate them, and hopefully wait as long as they can before signing one, if that's the approach they're going to take?
Yeah, the motion does not talk about halting consideration. It says postpone any decisions on the LMA option.
I see, thank you.
Okay, so, that PMB can do what they want to look at things, although they should do it in public. And I really reject this notion that there's some sort of contractual obligation to keep secret the names of the applicants about something that is vital to hundreds of thousands of people.
So just to be clear, you would do it in public even if that meant certain of the offers went away?
Okay, there's no back and forth, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Okay,
That's it.
okay, thank you, Bob.